Today's episode is brought to you by Growing for Market magazine. For 31 years, Growing for Market magazine has been the source of practical ideas and information for direct market vegetable and flower growers. All articles are written by farmers who get their hands dirty and know what they're doing. If you do farmers markets, CSA, farm stand, pick your own, florist sales, or wholesaling, whether you're a commercial grower or want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market for the nitty-gritty details of growing, marketing, and the business of small farming. Available as paper magazine and a digital download with thousands of archived articles available. Use the coupon code WORM, that's WORM, to get 25% off any subscription at growingformarket.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by RIMOL Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. RIMOL Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimolgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a RIMOL tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out. All right, let's jam. Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 12, season 4. Got a super great episode for you all this week with Cheyenne Sundance of Sundance Harvest in Toronto, Canada. Cheyenne grows stunning produce on leased land in the middle of a park in a very large city, and we get all the nerdy details about her production and how it all works. We talk about the raised bed design, refreshing the fertility using a lot of vermicast and other things. And I also truly enjoyed hearing a 25-year-old farmer taking their quality of life very seriously. When it was over, I just felt refreshed and excited for Cheyenne and the next generation of market gardeners in general. I'm sure you all will feel the same, but before we dive in, a couple of places you can find me for this first part of 2022. I will be presenting virtually at the OAK, that's the Organic Association of Kentucky conference in later January, one of my favorites. I will also be presenting virtually at NOFA New York and NOFA Vermont, those conferences, as well as Acorns. I will also be live and in person as of right now at the OEFFA, Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association conference for a full day event there. Then immediately I'm hoofing it down to Texas for the Mother Earth News Fair. Then in March, I will be in Indiana at the Indiana Small Farmers Conference. So busy times ahead, but those are some places you can catch me if you were thinking about those events. Attend, support these groups. They're awesome. Last thing, if you appreciate our work and that we keep it free and open to anyone and everyone, please consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-till-growers. You can always support us by kicking us a few bucks on Venmo to @no-till-growers or on PayPal to no-till-growers@gmail.com. Or you can simply pick up a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, from no-till-growers.com. Many ways to support us, but when you go the Patreon route, there are discounts on merch when we have it, the book, and future No-Till Growers events, but also at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Evan Carlson, Stephen Smith, Ojai Roots, Veggie Cropper, Scott Snodgrass, Jay Mill, Lucas Brendel, Jacob Arthur, and Yannick LaPlante. Big thanks to anyone and everyone who supports our work in whatever way that you can. It is very much appreciated. Okay, let's get into this amazing show with Cheyenne Sundance of Sundance Harvest. Cheyenne Sundance, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's so great to have you. All right, well, let's start where we always start with this thing. Maybe you could give us a little bit of the overview. Where are you located and the kind of acreage you're working on?
Sure. So I am located in Ontario, Canada, in a city called Toronto, and I'm actually farming in this really, really large park called Downview Park. And it's really accessible to the public through transit or just driving. So I like that a lot because we have a big kind of agritourism component to our farm. We are up to 1.5 acres now, which is pretty big for a farm in the city, and it's on par with a lot of my friends who are farming rurally. We have 2 heated greenhouses, both around the size of 2,000 square feet, and we grow a diversity of crops. Next year, we're growing a lot of crops, probably more crops than I've ever grown in my life. So squashes, root vegetables, herbs, greens, the run-of-the-mill, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, eggplants, etc., mushrooms, and then also a bunch of cut flowers. We're growing 20 different types of cut flowers next year because we're going to do a U-pick flower farm. And, of course, our marketing streams are, I would say, pretty not super remarkable. They're going to be farmers markets. We do that. We do a CSA of 150 people in the main season and then 100 people next fall and winter. And then we do on-site farm sales. So we have a farm stand, which is going to be pretty, I would say, high traffic next year simply because we're in a very visible area. And then, of course, the U-Pick Flower Farm is probably one of my biggest projects I'm excited about because that will really bring in a lot of people to the farm every weekend.
That's super cool. I didn't know about the U-Pick Flower Farm. That's really interesting. Maybe we could talk about that, but can you give us a little bit of an idea of like how this situation with the park kind of came to be?
Yeah, the situation with the park. So basically, I'm 24 and I started Sundance Harvest, I think when I was like 21 or 22. And I was traveling a lot, to the West Coast here in Canada and BC. I went down to Montana, Idaho, Wyoming. I did a lot of backpacking by myself. I was very much a wild child. And when I came back to Toronto to kind of settle down and maybe find some roots, I stumbled upon this park because I was hanging out there one day. And there was 3 greenhouses and a bunch of field space. And I remember I peeked into one of the greenhouses because I'm a very curious cat. And I saw that it was empty. And I was like, whoa, there's just a golf cart in here. We don't need a golf cart in here in the wintertime. You can grow food. So I basically just kind of took the bull by its horns and I called up the landlord and I found out the property manager and I said, can you please have a meeting with me? And when he met with me after talking on the phone, I think he was surprised to see a 21-year-old girl when they're so often used to, renting to tenants who have like a lot of money or have been in business for a while. So, they took a chance on me, which I'm really glad they did. And that's kind of how I got started. And I would say to really anyone who's farming in the city, who's having problems finding land is really, again, take the bull by its horns and ask those questions because they probably wouldn't have rented it out. And I probably also wouldn't have expanded from my initial 800 square feet to 1.5 acres in 2 years.
Yeah, that's great. So what was the state of this greenhouse? Like when you first took it, you mentioned there was a golf cart in it, but like, was there any infrastructure? What was there?
So it's a really beautiful greenhouse. Like it has automatic vents, it's propane heat. There wasn't any soil. Like they had landscape fabric and underneath like really compacted clay with a bit of gravel. So it was pretty straightforward. What I did was I built these raised beds with lumber and I just put compost in it. And you can probably see that on my Instagram. Some people ask me why I didn't dump soil in the entire greenhouse, and it's because that would have been extremely expensive. And we also keep things like chest freezers in there, and we have a packing area. So I didn't want my staff to be slipping in mud because they're harvesting and packing is kind of dangerous. So it was just straightforward, empty greenhouse. But the vents and the propane make the world of a difference. I for sure, if I ended up moving rural instead of farming in the city, I could never afford a greenhouse that bougie. I would probably do caterpillar tunnels if I wasn't farming within an existing structure that I lease.
Yeah, that's good. So are you having to cover the propane or is the city doing that as well?
That's a big question I get. So I'm a lucky duck and I don't cover any propane, any electricity, any water. So it's all included in my lease. And the lease, I guess it's like, I'm pretty lucky. Like, it's expensive. I will say it's expensive. It's what you consider market rate for Toronto. But because everything's included, in my opinion, it's worthwhile. And in the summer, we can make like, a lot more than the lease is. So it balances out in the winter months. We make like hardly anything.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great that it's included in your lease though. That's super helpful. The beds. Okay. So maybe we could just start there talking about, you mentioned building the beds. You probably, had to decide on the width and length and like what kind of went into that. And is there anything you would change about like how you design those beds?
Yeah. So my beds, they're 4 feet wide and 48 feet long. And I made the decision initially because when I got the greenhouse, I actually rented half of it. And it's because I had no like savings. Like I had a couple $100s to my name when I started Sundance Harvest, and I only got a $5,000 grant. So I couldn't afford to actually lease the entire greenhouse. And I started leasing it in September, so I needed to get started quite fast as well. So I decided on the dimensions because I wanted to maximize the space I could use in the greenhouse to actually grow. Doing a traditional 30-inch bed, I find works great for us outside because we get to, step over it. But in the greenhouse, I have no issue with stretching over to get greens. So that's basically why. We just wanted to maximize space. I love 4 feet wide beds, though.
Would you go, so you don't think you'd go wider or smaller if you could do it again?
No, I don't think I would go. For the greenhouses, I love 4 feet wide. It makes sense. I'm also 5'5", so I'm not very big. So it's kind of hard for me to I can't jump over a 4 feet beds. I have to walk on them. And in the greenhouses, on the very edge of the greenhouses where the walls start to curve, that's where we pack our CSA. So if I go any wider, I don't think the staff will be able to walk, or they'll have to tiptoe and they'll end up hating me. So I don't want to stretch the beds any more than they already are.
What's the distance? What's your pathway?
Yeah, our pathways are 12 inches maximum. Like I'm a stickler for small pathways. The smallest we went was 10 inches, and everyone was like uncomfortable walking down the kale paths. But we try to do as little as 10 and then as wide as 12. On the field, it's different. We do squash with no walkways. So we don't even consider a walkway for any squash because it trails. And next year we're doing 10 beds of 2.5, so like 30 inches wide and like 80 feet long squash beds. So it's going to be a giant block of just squash. And
those are the ones that are going in the field.
Yeah. We have like a lot of field space now, so we're going to have like a gigantic squash block.
Yeah, that's great. It's one of my favorite things to look at in the summertime is a big block of squash. Okay, so you had to fill these beds with something. What did you fill them with? And then how do you sort of manage that fertility year after year?
For the amendments in the greenhouses, we have 2 greenhouses. The first greenhouse where I got started, I initially started with a bed that was 4 feet wide and 48 feet long. And then as I expanded to the full greenhouse, I doubled the size. So I had 2 of those types of beds. And then in the second greenhouse, we have the same setup, 4 feet by 48, but then we also use fabric pots for the other half because in the wintertime, we do fabric pots. In the spring, we have it as a seedling area. And in the summer, we do ginger. So for all of the growing spaces in both of the greenhouses, what we do for fertility is we initially put triple mix. So like, a basic potting mix in all of the planters. And then every season, we add 3 to 4 inches of worm compost. And that's a pretty expensive thing to add on, but we've had really, really good harvests for cucumbers, especially like out of this world. Like we were harvesting from 4 feet wide, 48 feet long beds. Like we had like 4 of those, like 200 pounds of cucumbers a week in April. It was wild. So we do that. And aside from that, we do fish emulsion with every transplant. But we don't add anything beyond worm compost and fish emulsion in terms of when we want to add more nutrients. And we don't till the beds because there's no point. So there's lots of earthworms in the beds. They often come up from underneath the greenhouse, which is really interesting. And we flush the beds every summer build up because we can have that issue because there's no rainfall that's naturally coming in. So we put a hose on all our beds and we literally flush it and then open the doors and then the water kind of seeps through, and we do this on the hottest day of summer, so it's not super muddy in there.
Wow. Okay, that's great. So I'm sure you've done some amount of cost benefit analysis with it, because I know for us, vermicompost is expensive. Have you done that math? Do you feel like, with that cucumber yield, it seems like it probably works itself out.
Yeah. So I will say, being very frank, I flunked math twice in high school, so I'm not very good at any math. But I will say that it makes a lot of sense for us because the way we apply it is we always apply it on a really, really cloudy week because we don't want any bacteria to die off. I may not understand science, but I think this is right because when I'm thinking about worm compost tea, you want to keep it aerated, you want to keep it moist. And we really drench our beds like really, really well when we put the worm compost on. So that I guess the worm tea, we're kind of making it, kind of leaches down into the beds. But I would say our soil quality is like super, super fluffy. Like I walk on the beds, which is a no-no. And I say, oh, no one should walk on the beds. But I walk on my beds and I can still, if I'm harvesting a head lettuce, if I want to pull it out by its roots, I just put my hand in and it comes out. Like I don't need any trowel, which is really, really nice. So I found that it works. And we don't really have a super good source of vegetable compost here where I am. I have some vegetable compost, but I don't think it's of the best quality to use in the greenhouse. I mainly use that on the field.
Yeah, that's great. I really wish we had a better vermicompost source here because it's the benefits are enormous. And maybe I've missed this. How tall are those beds?
So the beds are 8 inches tall, and so they're not very tall. And we grow a lot of cucumbers and a lot of tomatoes. We often, can from one greenhouse get 200 pounds of tomatoes a week on average, and that's for like months and months and months. So they're not very deep. So I don't know. I would prefer to have deeper beds, but it seems like because we add so much fertility, 4 times a year, that the roots are really happy. So I think that's kind of the workaround. We just add a lot of organic matter.
And then you mentioned having employees and stuff and maybe even working with other farms. Is that correct? Like, can you give us an idea of the structure, like the overall structure of your business and how that works? Yeah.
So when I started, I would say there's not a lot of diversity, obviously, in farming, but in Ontario, there's like hardly any. So I couldn't really find anyone to mentor me or work with me. So for a while, I was just trying to meet new people. And then I ended up meeting a lot of young farmers of color. And then all of us kind of spoke about the same thing. Sometimes we have too much produce, we can't sell it. And many of them grew things that I didn't. Like someone, Sunil, he raised cows. And someone else, Aaliyah, she grew, and she does grow amazing greens, amazing kalu, and also awesome root vegetables. So I decided, well, in the wintertime especially, since there's such slim pickings, and we, at my farm at the time, last fall, we didn't grow a lot of root vegetables, that I'm going to support 10 other BIPOC farms and make a collective CSA. And that worked out pretty well. I will say that's kind of the only times we really partner with farms is in the wintertime because, in the summertime, sometimes I can get ahead of myself and forget to sow, that winter carrot bed. So it's been really helpful to be able to collaborate with others. But I wouldn't do that so much so in the summertime, and we don't do it in the summertime, simply because we have so much produce we can sell, and it's also extremely hectic. To do a collaborative CSA, I learned a lot. I would say the biggest thing is staying organized and understanding how to use spreadsheets, because I don't, and I didn't stay super organized this year. The biggest pitfall from that CSA was doing a meat component, because I didn't understand that the cold chain is a thing, and you have to always keep the cold chain cold. So with a head lettuce, in wintertime in Canada, it can be 2 degrees outside or something like that. And but for meat, you have to keep it frozen. So we have to keep that separately frozen, and it was a really, really big hassle with our delivery to have a separate frozen component to our CSA. So I won't be doing any meat anymore for our CSA, but I had a really good time with that.
Yeah. What is your sort of cooler setup? Do you have a walk-in cooler or are you doing harvesting into coolers? Like, how is that managed?
Yeah. So we have a brand new insulated, top of the line, super nice walk-in cooler now. It cost me a pretty penny, basically $10,000 Canadian, which hurt my soul. I was like, oof. And I had to get it because I bought about 1,000 pounds of carrots from Winter Soil farm in Ottawa. This amazing woman named Isabel who grows carrots. And I was like, I'm going to buy 1,000 carrots. This would be great for my CSA in the winter and the spring. And she shows up, 10 big Rubbermaid totes. And I was like, I need a cooler to store all these carrots. So luckily I got the cooler a month before I ordered it. So without that cooler, I 100% couldn't have a successful winter CSA. And we don't cool it because it's so cold here in Toronto. We got -5 the other day, and carrots didn't freeze, thankfully, because I put so much burlap into my cooler to absorb the humidity. But yeah, so we have one walk-in cooler, and then this is what I recommend to honestly all farms. In our greenhouse, we have 2 backup fridges, just like normal run-of-the-mill like family fridges. And we have that in case the cooler is on the fritz or something happens. It's like basically for emergency, but it saved me many times. And in the summer, we use that as a tomato cooler. So we set it at a temperature perfect for tomatoes. And if we can't sell tomatoes fast enough or we need to store them somewhere, we put them in those coolers. And then the last cooler, I know there's a lot of coolers here. The last cooler we have is, we have another cooler we're buying. It's like $2,500. It's that cheap because it's not very good. It's like a used cooler that is not insulated. Like it needs a lot of work, but I'm not going to actually insulate it at all because we're using that as a flower cooler because flowers don't need to be kept, at the lowest temperatures like lettuce does. So we'll do the U-Pick flower farm next year, but any bouquets we want to sell at the farmer's market, we'll harvest that the day before and store it in that not so nice cooler, which will be a great alternative to buy a brand new one.
Yeah, that's great. I've always kind of wanted a separate walk-in cooler that I could keep at a different temperature. And I know that a lot of flower growers do that. Like you mentioned, that flowers need different temperatures. And no, that's great. I think adjusting like a regular cooler to fit your tomatoes is really brilliant. And then in terms of like, what's your wash pack setup? Are you mentioned kind of doing some packing there in the greenhouse. What does that look like? Or is it?
Yeah, so it's always fun talking about this because a lot of my friends who are farmers as well, they always like make fun of me because I'm like a Luddite when it comes to wash and pack stuff. I don't know why. I cannot stand green bubblers. Or I can't stand the idea of washing salad, like baby greens. I think it's because I'm really impatient. But so we decided at the farm to never grow salad greens because I will not pack them. So then I can't tell my staff to pack them if I don't do something. Like if I do something and I tell them to do something different, I think that's wrong. So we literally have a hose with a setting, like a spray setting, and we put our bunches in Rubbermaids. We have a dirty bin with like the bunches from the field, we clean bin, and we just spray it in the field on wood chips so we don't get slippery. And that's how we wash everything. So we do head lettuce, we do, kale, collards, chard, callaloo, all those bunching greens, but we do not do salad mix. The only time we've done salad mix is in the winter greenhouses because we don't wash them and they're super nice. But yeah, even for spinach, we do bunches of spinach now. So we just have to hose it off. And our customers, they do not mind if there's a bit of dirt. Like they're super loyal customers, which I'm so happy for. And most of them find it really fun to wash their root vegetables. Like if we're growing carrots, we're not going to wash those carrots to sell. We sell carrots with soil on them and people buy them like hotcakes, which is really nice to see. So we don't have like a barrel washer. We don't have anything fancy like that. If we're going to sell some radishes at the farmer's market, which we don't do because we don't want to wash them, we might spray them. But for all of our root vegetables, since we don't bring vegetables to the actual farmer's market, we just pack them with soil in bags and then people wash them at home.
Yeah, I mean, that's great because if your customers don't care, I mean, there's not a lot of incentive for you to do it otherwise.
Yeah, and I also believe that like far too often, like I was just talking to someone I know the other day about this, like we shouldn't have to compete with grocery stores because we're not even doing the same product. Like we're farming in such a different ways. Oftentimes, like I pay fair wages to my staff. There's a total different ideology and a total different way we're going about actual farming and small scale farming that I don't even see a supermarket as my competitor because we're totally different mindsets and totally different ways of doing it. So I don't have to replicate everything I see because I'm creating an alternative. And so far, it's worked really, really great for us. So I'm probably going to keep never washing my carrots.
You mentioned customers. Can you describe a little bit about how the CSA works? Like, what's your setup? Is it like how many weeks do they go? Do they buy week to week? And where do your customers come from primarily?
Yeah, so we broke our CSA up into 10-week blocks. We have like a year-round CSA with breaks in between. It was really, really important to me to have breaks because I don't like to work a lot. And I will say this, my first year at Sundance, I worked really hard, 40, 50-hour weeks. And then I was like, wow, this isn't fun. I want to go to house parties and I want to go dancing and I want to go tobogganing. And I can't do that if I'm working on a Saturday at 5 a.m. So I decided I'm going to break up my CSA this year that we just had to 10-week blocks so I can have like a 2-week rest in between and then go on tobogganing trips or go camping and hang out with my friends and do that things that I want to do. I'm 24, I want to have fun. So that's really how we structured our CSA, and our staff love it because they get to also take trips and go on vacations. And it's a great way to structure, I believe, a CSA. This also allows people to understand seasonality. So they understand, okay, in the winter CSA, you won't have those tomatoes. Maybe you won't have as much squash you did in the fall, but you'll have beautiful bok choy and mecca-greens and mushrooms and carrots and beets. And they get to kind of see and compartmentalize the different vegetables per season. And then, we have 150 people in the main season. And then in the winter time, right now we have 50. And because we scaled up to, 1.5 acres, we're going to have 100 people next winter. And then the average customer, I would say, it lives in the city, because we deliver to the city, which is really lovely. And a lot of them are mothers, they're caregivers, they're fathers. A lot of families get our CSA, and it's actually really beautiful to see. Sometimes the kids visit the farm because we have tours, and they say, oh, this is the kale I had in the block. So one of the things I love about urban farming is that our customers can visit us literally whenever, and they don't need a car to do so. So a lot of people who maybe can't afford a car because it's pretty expensive here to get insurance and to have a car in the city, they can just take the subway and come to the farm and hang out with us and maybe pick up their CSA too. So yeah, the average customer is that. And I would say the average customer is someone who feels really passionate about what Sundance Harvest does, because we do a lot more than, I would say, grow food. We grow a lot of opportunities for young farmers as well. Yeah,
that's great. And you'd mentioned agritourism kind of being a part. Like, is that folded into the business model somewhere?
Yeah, so really this year is the big kahuna year because we've expanded so much. Like before we were at like 1/3 of an acre, now we're at 1.5. So like this is the year that Sundance is going to shine. So I think the U-Pick Flower Farm is like the cake that I'm looking at and I'm excited to eat, because we're going to have U-Picks on Saturdays and Sundays. We're going to do spots for like 30 to 50 people, $30 tickets, which will cover like a mason jar worth of like flowers, which is maybe like 30, 35 stems or something like that. And we're growing crops like zinnia, sunflowers, cosmos, bachelor buttons, Mexican sunflowers, or Mexican marigolds, and basic cut flowers, no dahlias, because I'm not playing no games. I don't want to do work. I want to lay down some landscape fabric and throw the zinnias in and let people harvest. So we are doing the basic flowers. You'll see like straw flowers and things like that. But yeah, agritourism is a really big part. I really am excited because I can see like the profits that we're going to be projected to make next year is enough that we can, have 4 staff members, not including me. People can have paid vacations, and this U-Pick Flower Farm will make a really big difference. And we have a big need, especially in the city of Toronto, for more like nature-based activities. Block TO, which is like a website, not really like a news. I would say it's more like a catchy, like clickbaity news site. They do these exposés. They're like, wow, this pumpkin farm, like 30 minutes from the city, you have to go. So I'm probably going to get one of those for my U-Pick. And like, this farm is right in the city with cut flowers. Come and get it. So it's going to be, I think, pretty easy to find people to come. And we're going to be serving popsicles. Like, we're going to sell popsicles and like ice cream, and we're going to have like vegetables for sale. We're going to have music, and we're also building a bunch of picnic tables, and we're going to have a hammock. So I feel like just even the hammock on a sunny day with a popsicle will entice people to come to my U-Pick.
I mean, yeah, that sounds great. And then are you doing, I know you do some online training and stuff that you sell courses like that or sell classes. Are you doing some in-person sort of farming education as well?
Yeah, so it's been really popular to do like farming and growing training at the farm. There's like in Toronto, it's wild because Toronto's a big city. Like it's really big. There's no one who does like learn how to grow your own food or, learn how to farm, because there's no spaces in Toronto to actually grow food. Like our farm in the park, there's 2 farms, and that's the only urban farms I know that exist on a scale that can provide those trainings. So it's just me. So there's really no competition. So I find it pretty easy. And we do seasonal workshops, so 10-week blocks, exactly like our CSA, and they're lined up at the same time of our CSA. So staff can still take all the vacations they want. And I teach them. I don't make my staff teach them because not everyone likes to communicate with a bunch of people on a Saturday morning. And we basically do these workshops, not just geared for new farmers, but any growers, because most people who are going to be taking them in the city aren't going to start a farm. So I really need to market it to people that just want to grow in their backyard or balcony, or maybe one day have a dream farm or a hobby farm. So we do that, and that brings in, I would say, a good amount of revenue, but we're not like a farm that does just workshops and that's how we make our profit. I would say, like, if we didn't do any workshops or teaching, we would still make a okay profit as a farm. But the workshops allow us to actually take all of that money and we reinvest it in the business. So all the funds I make from these workshops, doing 4 cohorts of them a year, I take all of that and I put that into the business to buy a new cooler or something I need, like more landscape fabric. But it's not like a necessity to run it. And I think that's a really big piece of our business plan that's super important, because what if no one comes? What if no one wants to buy a ticket? You can only post that so much on your Instagram story. So making sure that it's not like an integral piece has really allowed us to feel more safe and a bit more stable.
Hey, you all, just jumping in here real quick to get a word from our show sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil, this Cleveland, Ohio-based company, is producing some of the highest quality soil mixes out there. That's why I included their work in my book and use their products on my farm. This is true. Tilth Soil makes composts and potting mixes approved for use in certified organic operations like my own. Their living compost is made from food waste they haul and compost themselves, and it is the cornerstone of all of their blends. Tilth Soils take regenerative and organic growing to a new level. For more information on their products, including bulk ordering and their nationwide shipping, visit www.tilthsoil.com. All right, back to the show. A question about organic certification. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is that something that you're considering, or are you kind of that's not really something that you're interested in?
I'm not really interested in it for the main reason that we're not selling to restaurants or grocery stores. Here in Toronto, it's like you should be certified if you want to make a fair price in terms of wholesaling your crop to a grocery store. But because we're doing a CSA, and literally like everyone who's in my CSA like follows me on Instagram is like very devoted to the farm and like comes to the farm, because our CSA customers, they get free access to the U-Pick. So that's like a big incentive to always come by. But I don't really feel like I need it. I'm also really, really bad at organizational like taxes and math and forms. And everyone who knows me knows I cannot handle taxes. So I have an accountant. And soon we're going to have a payroll and communications person and marketing person, because I'm not very good at that. So I think my journey with farming, maybe at least until I'm 30 or something, is to not add anything new that I can't do well. So we don't need it right now, but I will say if I ever move rurally, I would 100% be certified, because it would make a lot more sense. But because we do a mix, with the greenhouses in the field, I don't feel like it makes much sense, and it seems like a headache to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, a lot of farms that do it, their customers can't and don't generally go to the farm very often. So like your transparency, not just online, but like the ability for people to access you gives them that, is the label for them, or it could be.
Exactly. Yeah. And like we have monthly farm tours. People literally like come in and they look at stuff. Like people come to our shelf, like at our greenhouse, and they just look at the fertilizers and we ask them questions. And like, this is the Fish Emulsion from Neptune's Harvest. It's organic and we use it on the seedlings and those crop and those crop. So I think because we're very, well known in Toronto, at least on our Instagram, and people just come by and they just chat, they feel more confident. And if anything, if they're really worried about their food, they have a face to blame. And that sounds maybe a bit wonky, but they do. And they have someone who is held accountable, which is me. So I'm the person there, and they know because I'm so open about it that they should feel safe. And we don't spray even with organic pesticides. We just kind of deal and balance the ecosystem really well at the farm. And that's probably the one thing I'm the most proud about with my farm is how we are balancing the ecosystem on the field and also in the greenhouse.
What's your, just a quick technical question. How are you applying that fish emulsion? Are you doing like a fertigation system, or is it something simpler, or how's that work?
Yeah, so the fish emulsion for the seedlings, because we grow like too many. We grow too many seedlings each year for our field. But we just literally have a watering can, and we put a little tray underneath with no holes under the 128 cell trays, and we just water it in with fish emulsion. And then whatever the runoff is in the bottom tray, it just kind of gets reabsorbed. So we do that. It's really, really low tech. We had like a pump sprayer, but I keep breaking it because I'm bad with tools. So we can't use that anymore. And for the greenhouses with the fish emulsion, we just, again, use a watering can. We're very, very basic with it. And then on the field, we don't really put lots of fish emulsion. We do a really big soil drench for all of our transplants the day before they're going to go out. Like, for example, if we're putting tomatoes in the field or anything like that, we would, in the morning, soak it in a big, big tote of fish emulsion, and like the roots would be soaked for like, I don't know, like 10 minutes, 30 minutes. It depends on how long I feel. And then I take it out and I let that get absorbed. And then we would transplant it in the afternoon and then do overhead watering just to kind of get it settled. So that's really how, but I would say in the field, we try to do a bit different than we do in the greenhouse. In the greenhouse, of course, I said we do worm compost, and fish emulsion. But in the field, we use a lot of chicken manure pellets because we can get them in big totes, and they can get delivered right to our greenhouse, which is excellent. So we apply a lot of that, and then a lot of compost, like 3 inches every transplant. So we can, cycle through 3 crops a year, and that's like 9 inches of compost. So most of my budget in terms of amendments, I would say 80% is compost or worm compost.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. It's that ends up being our most expensive amendment far and away. And then with the fields, are you doing any cover cropping or maybe even in your greenhouse, are you doing any cover cropping or anything like that? Or is it just straight crop to crop? How's that look?
So everyone's telling me I should cover crop. So I don't know if I should or not, but it's not. I don't do cover crops because we don't have time. I just want a harvest. I might do cover crops. I might do daikon this year because I can eat the daikon. And that's kind of what I want. I want like a crop that can be dual purpose. And we end up always doing like winter spinach on the field, or we do like garlic, or we do, carrots. Like we just did like literally, how many beds? 15, 80 feet long, 30-inch wide beds of garlic. So we have a lot of space that we end up putting winter crops in, so we don't actually have time to cover crops. I find that it works pretty good. Like we add so much compost, so I feel like that is some organic matter that's added back. I do believe, though, if we had a bunch more land, like 5 acres, I would cycle through blocks and I would do cover crops instead of buying compost, because that would be cheaper to use that as organic, like biomass, and let that break down naturally. But because we don't have a lot of space, we can't really afford to use cover crops to feed the soil, so we just buy compost.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things I love growing garlic, like I would grow so much garlic if I could. We grow, I think, around 9,000 bulbs, and it's, but I love what it does to the soil. I just love having a big green plant all winter. Mm-hmm. So no, I think that totally works. And to your point about the crops that you could eat, like the daikons, I had a mentor, or my first farming mentor, Eric Smith. They would spread turnips, mustard, kale, collards, and daikon radishes, and that was just their cover crop. And then when if they wanted to go out and harvest whatever looked good, they would just go through there, and we would just pick out like bunches of turnips and bunches of radishes or whatever it was in there, and then we would just leave the rest, and it was a perfect cover crop. So it was like a forage crop, kind of dual purpose.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah, I really want to do daikons next year, because I think also it's like super cool how long they can get. And they can store pretty all right for a winter crop to sell, if we don't have something in our CSA 1 week. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, and great for the soil. And you mentioned a couple times, if you ever move somewhere rural, or if you ever had access to 5 acres, like, is that kind of in your plan and in your thinking that you would want to keep scaling up and maybe even if it meant moving out of the city?
Yeah, I would say like my ideal plan is, in a couple years, because we have like a longer term lease, maybe even like not this year, but next year, like 2023, I'd move to the coast, like Nova Scotia. And I know someone who has a farm, Noah, and maybe I'd be able to farm on his land or something like that. But I would like to actually do berries, like something like blueberries or hackberries or raspberries and strawberries, and work that into the equation. So I also want to do livestock in the future, because I do believe like a closed loop system is possible. And I don't like having to buy compost. So if I can get manure, I think that would actually be a really big benefit. And then, of course, yeah, I would do cover crops a lot. But it's simply like the space, right? Like I need to think about, because my lease is so much in Toronto for the land and the property, that I can't afford to have a crop that doesn't make profit. But I'm really excited in the future when I farm rurally that maybe I don't have to focus on that much. And I can understand like, rye does this to the soil, and I can see year to year what each cover crop does to the land and take those notes, be more meticulous with it. But that's like the future. I still have a lot of time to, sling some vegetables here in Toronto.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. You probably wouldn't on a lease situation there. You're not going to put in a bunch of perennials and like the blueberries, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The only perennials we do is perennial flowers, and we do that so it looks pretty. But I also I don't know if this is a bit wild or not, but I'm probably going to be, moving out in a year or something like that. But Sundance will keep running without me being there full time. But I'm going to rip up all my perennial flowers and take it with me to the coast if I move to the coast. So I'm growing like 1,000 perennials right now at the farm, but they're all flowers, so they don't take a long time. Like they bloom in their first year.
Yeah, we have there's so many good farms out in Nova Scotia. That's like I'd love to go up there, because I there's so many good farms up there, and it just sounds like really pretty farmland. Can we talk for a minute about bunch greens? And it seems like you do the most beautiful chard, some of the most beautiful chard I've ever seen. But Charred, Kale, Collards, it seems like you do a lot of those kind of greens. Can you talk about some of those and some of what you've learned and how you approach those crops?
Yeah, sure. So thank you about my chard. I'm very proud of it. So with the bunch greens, the first thing is I remember when I started farming, everyone was like, you must do salad greens. They make so much profit per bed. And I was like, they do, but I don't like washing them and drying them. So the idea of bunch greens was literally that. And because, a lot of my staff in Toronto gets really hot the summers, it's really erratic, the temperatures. And I didn't want them to be in the wash pack shed, washing 300 bags, 400 bags a week, because we have such a big CSA. Instead, if they hose it down, hose a bunch of, arugula down, that works great. So we do, next year we're going to have a lot of different bunching greens, like mizuna, arugula, bok choy, of course, kale, collards, chard, callaloo, sorrel, which is this type of French green that's pretty popular. People really like it for some reason. And then, of course, spinach, we're going to harvest spinach just as the plant. And then a few others that I probably can't think about right now, but of course, lettuce. So with it, it's really easy. Again, you just hose it down. And I think too many farmers think, you have to be super meticulous. And I think you do if you have livestock on the land, because you don't want to worry about pathogens, and you have to be really, really safe. But because we literally just have vegetables and leaves and mushrooms, hosing it down is perfectly fine. But I do believe if you're packing it for a CSA, the biggest thing with bunching greens is wilting. So if you're doing a farmer's market, and we're not selling any vegetables at farmer's markets this year coming up, we're just strictly doing flowers. But for farmer's markets, a big thing I like doing, and this might help other people, is those catering pans, the metal catering shallow pans. We would get that and then put ice and then put water, and then you'd only snip the end of your bunch, the stems, at the market. So you would harvest it, you would not clean snip, And at the market, you clean snip and then put it in the actual ice water. And this would keep it super, super tender and super like lofty and crunchy and not wilty. So I highly recommend that. If you like snip the ends of the market, put in the ice water, and it works great. If you're doing a CSA, what we do is we put ice in a bin and we like shock the greens. So we don't just spray it, we just like shock it if we have like a CSA that we want to put it in. And then, with a bin, it's kind of difficult because if it's sitting on someone's porch for a CSA, it's obviously not going to look so hot. So we put these like ice packs in the summer that are like medical grade so they don't like sweat a bunch, and it keeps it pretty toasty. But our customers next year, because we're like really scaling up our delivery game, they'll get a text, so they'll get alerted, so then they can get their greens before they wilt and look very sad.
Yeah, that's definitely can be an issue for growers. I like that tip. One thing I wanted to talk to you about that I think is like you've mentioned it directly several times is your sort of dedication to like taking care of yourself and enjoying yourself. I think it's really refreshing to hear somebody talk about how you've designed your farm in a way that you actually cater to your own needs and your own wants. And like, I definitely didn't do that in the beginning, and in my 20s was not considering like taking care of myself. What are some of the things that you think about when you think about like self-care or, designing your farm around your what you want to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the biggest thing, when I started farming, a bunch of my farm friends would be like, yeah, I just worked at this farm for 1 year and then I quit. And I was like, well, why did you quit? They're like, oh, I'm burnt out because like they pushed me too hard. They had way too many demands to get things done in the season. And I kept noticing all my friends would just quit after a year. And I was like, wow, that doesn't seem like a good job. So a lot of them never got like paid vacations. They never got time off in the summer. And then none of them could hang out with me when I wasn't farming, right? I wanted to have fun and go swimming in a lake, but they couldn't come to my like swim parties. So I was like, damn, I don't want that. So I just really decided when I started my farm to kind of do it different. I also really don't understand why a lot of farms don't focus on retention of employees, because the most grueling thing is to train a new employee, in my opinion, because you have to train them every single thing and then it takes, I would say at least like 6 months for them to really get up to speed and feel really confident with their skills. So it just feels like a waste of time to have to train a new person, maybe 4 new people every single year. So with the way I kind of grew the farm and did the farm is because I want to retain employees, because without my employees, my farm would be nothing. Like I hardly work anymore. And it's because I'm mainly doing directing of the farm, like deciding what we grow and how we grow and all that stuff. But if it wasn't for like Maya, for example, who's our farm manager, we would be very little. We would be able to provide like 10 bunches of kale a week. So I think with that being said, the way we framed it, the biggest thing was to do CSAs and blocks, because again, it does provide those 2-week at least breaks before and after to get your head straight. And then of course for any workshops, agritourism, they have to follow the block. So we have those production blocks 4 times a year. And every single thing, deliveries, down to the T, they have to happen with them in the blocks. If they don't happen within the blocks, then we're not going to get the delivery because no one's going to be at the farm that day. So I think that's like the biggest thing for me, because, you don't want to burn out when you're 25 and you don't want to throw out your back when you're 35. I want to have like a very long, happy life in farming for a while. I don't want to have to fall out of love with farming because I'm just pushing myself too far. But there's also many ways people in my friend's farm, for example, my friend Selena, she has honeybees on my farm. And that's a very great way to farm for her because it works with her lifestyle. She doesn't want to wake up maybe, 5 a.m. every day to harvest lettuce in the summer before it wilts. So she gets to kind of farm in the way that works for her. And my other friend grows mushrooms in the forest. And that works out really well for him because he gets to get flushes in the spring and the fall, and gets to have a great time in the summer when there's no flushes. So I think just figuring out how it works is great. And also, there's a few people that told me when I started Sundance Harvest, oh, your farm can't be profitable if you provide paid vacations and if you don't work all of the summer and do this. I'm like, well, you can make it profitable if you just kind of figure out who your customer is, and also try to add in a diversity of income streams. And that ended up working out really well for us. But yeah, I don't want to have no fun in my 20s. I want to have a lot of fun and then have a really awesome farm.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's how we should, it's something I wish I'd heard when I was starting out farming, because it was all toil for us. And another thing that, it sounds like, just based on your practices, that you're probably also not spending, and your crew is not having to spend a lot of time weeding, which is what ends up burning a lot of people out.
Oh, we don't weed at all. Yeah, I have I don't know how to say this. There's some old timers just say, oh, Cheyenne has no patience or virtue. And that's okay. I don't really, because I won't be weeding in the fields. I buy a lot of landscape fabric, which I understand has some moral complications with petroleum. But when I think about it, it lasts 10 years and we don't weed at all. And that's tens of hours, especially on 1.5 acres with all our thistle of just not weeding. So our staff just goes into the fields, they harvest, and then they come back, and that's all. So it does help with morale so much. And if someone gave me $10,000 today, I would spend all of that on landscape fabric.
It makes a huge difference. I feel like one of the biggest things I've heard about, no tillage techniques and things like landscape fabric, the silage tarp and all of these, but a lot of mulches, compost mulches. And I heard this at Acres the other day when I was there. They just said, people came up and were like, this has saved me so much time and energy. I'm not weeding anymore. And that just, I grew, when I started farming, weeding to me was farming. I didn't see it any other way. And I think those things are, it's not that hard to remedy them, but you do have to, maybe it takes some upfront cost, but I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I really appreciate about your work is that you're very candid and honest. You've said many times exactly, what you're good at, what you're not good at. I'm sure, you've already done this several times in general, but I'm curious if there are mistakes you've made as a beginning farmer that you think would be helpful to share with others who are, just starting out.
For the mistakes, I made a lot of mistakes because I never really worked on a farm before I started Sundance Harvest. So if you've never worked on a farm and you're just throwing yourself in, give yourself 2 years of grace to make all the mistakes that you need to make, which is perfectly fine. And I don't feel bad about my mistakes. I share them on social media so much. One of the mistakes I made my very first year was I was a really silly goose and thought that I could grow salad greens without putting my vents on in my greenhouse. And I got so many aphids that ate so much of my salad greens. And I remember being really stressed out because I had a CSA at the time. I didn't know what to do. And I felt really, really overwhelmed. And that was one of the points in my farming career where I literally thought I couldn't farm because it was just too much to handle. So one of the mistakes was to not understand that greenhouse culture is different than field cultures. But that mistake tied into a really bigger mistake is that I expected far too much of myself the very first year farming. I wasn't very, in my opinion, smart to have a CSA my first year. I should have just focused on farmers markets because, you can bring whatever you have that day. With the CSA, people expect, 5 to 8 different vegetables a week. And you have a certain amount of CSA customers that you have to provide to because you're literally indebted to them because you spent the money on seeds or supplies earlier in the season. So I had a Winter CSA, which is a really, really big thing to do, considering it's really hard to grow awesome winter greens and winter food. And it was my first year as well. So I would say a mistake I made was to even do a CSA in my first year. And then I obviously love to double down on my own mistake and have one in the winter too. So that was a big mistake. And then I would say the other mistake, the last one I'll talk about, because I have way too many mistakes I've made, is I didn't invest in a walk-in cooler sooner. My pocketbook hurt so bad with that $10,000 cooler purchase that I'm still paying off right now. But if I purchased a cooler my first year in the summer, I feel like I could have grown and sold a lot more vegetables because it was really stressful to have to, the day of market, go to the farm super early, harvest 200 pounds of tomatoes and sell that the very same day. It wasn't really good for also my work-life balance. And that's why I said, I worked those 40, 50-hour weeks because I'd have to go to the farm every single day to harvest because I had no way to actually cool it or keep it, at room temperature because there was no cooler. So if I bought a cooler and I invested in that, I think I would have been able to have a better first year and also been able to profit more from my farm. So walk-in coolers are great. If you can't afford one, You can get like an old refrigerator or get an old chest freezer, and you can convert that into an actual cooler. Just having something so you don't have to go to your farm the day of market and also then go to market.
That's great. I don't think I want to end on a mistake, though. Maybe you can give us a big win. Is there anything that like... Yeah, you feel like has been really successful that you feel like this is something I'd want to share with people too?
Yeah. So the one thing that I feel like I've had a lot of success with is to corner the winter farming CSA game. There's no farms in my region that really provide a winter CSA. So I kind of took that and ran with it. Last year, after I made a bit of mistakes, I kind of found my footings and I did a good job, I would say, with my winter CSA last year. And then this year, I'm doing an all right job, I think. My winter CSA starts in January. My fall one's ending next week, which I'm really excited about. The only thing with the winter CSA, I would say, is to try to have 80% storage crops. This year, I was playing really, I would say a bit risky because I had like 80% greens, and that's a really hard thing to do in the winter because, as most of us know, things take twice as long, more pest pressure. So I think that's something that I'm doing really well, is kind of honing in what a good winter CSA looks like for my region and my farming techniques. And next year, we're growing so many storage crops, like a bunch, like at least 15 different storage crops just for our winter CSA, to have not so much 80% greens in a winter CSA, but 80% storage vegetables and then 20% greens, just to balance things out.
That's great. Well, Cheyenne Sundance, thank you so much for your time. This has been such a delightful conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be on this podcast.
Well, and I'm super excited to have you. It's such an honor.
Thank you.
All right, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to follow Cheyenne on Instagram and all of the places. We will hook it up with links in the show notes. Also, you can support our work at no-tillgrowers.com by picking up a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook. Proceeds from that sale at no-tillgrowers.com go to making you more free content. Venmo us a little thank you to @no-tillgrowers, or PayPal to no-tillgrowers@gmail.com. All that works too, and we super duper appreciate it. And of course, patreon.com/no-tillgrowers is vitally important to our work. So thank you however you can find a way to support our work. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you are getting it and leave a review. But this week, all reviews must be in the form of a Wordle puzzle. And if you haven't discovered Wordle yet, I'm sorry, because it's about to ruin your productivity. Today's episode is brought to you in part by a grant from Southern SARE. Big thanks to Jackson Roulette for all of his work, Josh Satin for his video guidance, Willie Breeding for the theme music, and of course my amazing wife, Hannah Crabtree. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye. Actually, one of the more fun interviews I think I've ever done. It's just like joyful.
Oh, thank you.